Coming up, the president in town.
I'm honored to be here today in Kansas City, Missouri.
A week after a major tragedy, a push for action. KU back in the headlines, courtesy of our nation's Attorney General.
Some schools are doing everything they can to create a generation of sanctimonious, sensitive, supercilious snowflakes.
And in Overland Park, from viral sensation to scandal, all in the same week.
Week in Review is made possible through the generous support of Dave and Jamie Cummings, Bob and Marlise Gorley, Smithfield Foods, Haas and Wilkerson Insurance, the Courtney S. Turner Charitable Trust, John H. Mize and Bank of America N.A. co-trustees, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Nick Haynes. Good to have your company as we connect the dots on the news of the week in this place we call home, reviewing our week's top local happenings. From 41 Action News, anchor and reporter Dia Wall, and from the Fox 4 Morning News team, anchor Mark Alford. He keeps you up to date on KCUR, Kansas City Star editorialist Steve Kraske, and Star columnist and editorial writer Dave Helling. It's not often the president comes to your town. If you weren't there, here's a compilation of some of the sights and sounds of Mr. Trump's trip to KC.
I'm honored to be here today in Kansas City, Missouri.
It was amazing. He was really nice and kind, and he shook my hand. It was really cool. He shook my hand, and I'm never washing it again. Yeah, same.
We're now in the midst of a great economic revival. We've created 3.7 million jobs since election. Unemployment has reached the lowest levels ever recorded.
I thought it was a great speech. He especially impressed me about his things he's doing with the Veterans Administration.
I'm a member of the VFW, and I don't feel that he represents the interests of us as a group, or Americans in general.
Don't believe the crap you see from these people, the fake news.
He offers a lot of if he can do half of what he said up there tonight, I'm satisfied.
He is so volatile in the way he speaks and the way he tweets.
I think he needs reinforcements in Washington, D.C.
Well, I'm glad these people are here, but there should be lots and lots more. Lots and lots more.
Hopefully that you will allow me to bring my family into the Oval Office to meet you.
A snapshot of images and voices from the president's visit to Kansas City this week. Dia, you clocked in 14 hours of reporting on Tuesday when the president came to town. Anything unanticipated, unexpected for you from that visit?
I feel like the speech is the same that we hear from President Trump often. Same talking points, same high notes, same low points. Yelling at the fake media. That was interesting. I mean, you could feel the aggression and the tension in the room just rise. I was really glad that the VFW, though, said, hey, we want these people here. We're happy to have them. That means a lot because for me and my colleagues across the table, that's really important. But you got to see a clip of Sergeant Alan Jones. Talk about making it count. It's not too many people who can steal the show from the president.
Mark.
That was impressive to see this. What, he's 95 years old?
94, he'll be 95.
Talk about the art of the deal. This guy steps up and puts the President of the United States on the spot, saying, I want to come to the White House, the Oval Office, and he gets it done.
Anything you learned from this visit by the president this week that we don't see from him when he goes to countless other rallies and events?
No, I actually went back and read some transcripts of President Obama's speeches to the VFW to compare, and there are instances in which President Obama talked about the economy and his accomplishments, so that political part of the speech wasn't a surprise. I was very surprised that Josh Hawley gave remarks, and I know we'll talk about that in a little bit. But typically speeches to the VFW are supposed to be at least nominally bipartisan or nonpartisan, and his speech surprised me a little bit, him coming up. Other than that, no, it was standard stuff.
So the president went to the Veterans for Foreign Wars convention. He did a fundraiser for Josh Hawley. Were there any other stops that we don't know about at this point,
I'm not
Steve?
aware of any, Nick. I think we saw him. That's what we got. Yeah.
Now, was there was some conversation about, you saw some of the news accounts relating to him being told that being turned down at Arthur Bryant's barbecue, Dia.
Now, this is one instance where I will say fake news. He was not turned away from Arthur Bryant's. And what's funny is when we were preparing for the president's visit, we said, oh, maybe we should go to some of the other spots around town that other presidents have visited. But President Trump isn't that kind of guy. He's not going to go grab a beer or go sit down and have barbecue someplace like W or maybe Obama. So actually, he came in town, did the VFW, did the fundraiser, got back on Air Force One and headed on out.
Now, from the moment he touched down at KCI, the president appeared to be joined at the hip by Missouri Attorney General Josh Hawley. Hawley is trying to unseat Missouri Senator Claire McCaskill in November. How does Mr. Trump's time in Kansas City impact that race, Steve?
Well, it's always impactful, I think, when the president of the United States weighs in on a race like this. I think one thing you have to think about here is, you know, Donald Trump won Missouri by 19 points. The more recent polls I've seen about where he stands in Missouri, Nick, he's favored by about 5% more people than he's not favored by in Missouri. That suggests his standing has dropped, maybe even precipitously in Missouri over the last year and a half here. So if that trajectory continues, you wonder about how Josh Hawley will do being so closely tied to the president. Josh Hawley is all in now with Donald Trump, Nick.
Yeah. Just quickly, Josh Hawley still has a lingering problem with his actions during the Eric Greitens affair. And there are Eric Greitens supporters who are still angry at Josh Hawley for his statements and his pursuit of the former governor. Many Greitens supporters are Trump supporters. Hawley has to do something to try to get them back into the fold, because the same election that Donald Trump carried by 19 points in Missouri, Roy Blunt won by 3 points over Jason Kander in the Donald Trump year. So it's a much more 50-50 state at the Senate level. So I think Josh Hawley's repeated references to Donald Trump are a way to get some of the Eric Greitens people back in the fold. He'll need them if he's going to be. You were doing some extensive reporting on this week, and including some experts that said certainly Josh Hawley would get a bump from the president anytime a president comes to town.
Well, when the president has campaigned, like in North Dakota, some of the other places where he's been kind of campaigning for these Senate candidates, they have seen a bump in the polls. I think it's interesting that he's here before the primary has even happened. I've had people tell me the head of the Missouri Republican Party says that's probably a clear indicator that the president will be back sometime this fall to keep campaigning. But I also want to point out, Josh Hawley did really well in 2016. He got more votes than the president. He got more votes than Roy Blunt. But this is really a toss-up race. I'm not the expert on that one.
Claire McCaskill, I think, is in serious trouble this time around. She doesn't have an Akins to bail her out for a gaffe. And so Josh Hawley is smooth, level, he's young, he's energetic, he said all the right things. We'll see if that translates to votes.
Now, over the weekend, one of, by the way, I should point out, you know, we had what was happening with Kevin Yoder during this visit. We did see, for instance, I was told that he was actually on the plane with the president when he came to Kansas City, but we didn't seem to see him in any of the videography, the photographs with the president, right?
Nick, that is not by chance that you didn't see Kevin Yoder here. Kevin Yoder is running for re-election in a district that Hillary Clinton actually carried by a single point, not very much, but actually carried. Yoder has to really thread a needle here when it comes to his relationship with Donald Trump in a very difficult re-election race that he faces this year.
Now, over the weekend, one of Yoder's opponents was bringing in top political names of his own.
Thank you, Kansas City.
It is with that faith that we will knock on every door in this congressional district to win back the House.
These are scenes over the weekend of Bernie Sanders and one of the Democratic Party's brightest new stars campaigning for Brent Welder at the Reardon Center in Kansas City, Kansas. Welder is one of 6 Democrats trying to unseat Kevin Yoder in that race. Not to be outdone, though, Yoder takes to national TV.
We want this fight. We think the Bernie Sanders, Ocasio-Cortez wing of the Democratic Party, which is taking over, is not going to be a party that is going to appeal to middle-of-the-road voters.
So you think their message and their presence takes the party further to the left?
Yeah, it surely does. They're in the middle of a big primary right now, and they've got a lot of progressive voters in the Democratic Party. The center is open, and I think they're going to leave it behind, and we're going to capture a lot of those middle-of-the-road voters.
Is he right, Dave Helling?
Well, the idea that Kevin Yoder is somehow some kind of centrist will certainly be challenged no matter who the Democratic nominee ends up being in the 3rd District. We've been meeting with the candidates at the editorial board, and they all make the point that Kevin Yoder is far too aligned with Donald Trump. His voting record is much more conservative than he lets on. That'll be the battleground, really, in the 3rd District race, who can occupy that center, which is, by the way, why Kevin Yoder is so visible on immigration over the last couple of days, because he wants to emphasize this move to the center. That's where the battleground will be.
I think it's a point of contrast, though, Dave. When you compare what Yoder stands for and how he delivers himself compared to Ms. Cortez, it's a drastic difference. And when you consider Dennis Moore once held this seat, I mean, he was pretty much down the center. If you were a Republican, a lot of Republicans voted for him.
Right, but just my point is Kevin Yoder isn't right down the center either, and that people need to keep in mind.
But Democrats have their own big decision to make here, Nick. If they go with candidates endorsed by Bernie Sanders, is the Kansas 3rd Congressional District going to be amenable to a candidate who hails from the far left of the Democratic Party? Perhaps the answer is yes. Likewise, if they nominate a moderate, can that moderate gin up liberal voters from that wing of the party?
Okay, last week's tragedy on Table Rock Lake is now prompting action. Missouri U.S. Senator Claire McCaskill announcing on Capitol Hill that she will introduce legislation to restrict duck boats.
There's inherent dangers in these amphibious vehicles, and we know this. How do we know this? Because it's been investigated before. We've had 40 deaths associated with the duck boats since 1999, yet there has been little done to address the inherent dangers of these amphibious vehicles.
So what is Claire McCaskill proposing, dear?
One, it's very loose. It's in the early stages, but she's talking about the canopies that are over these duck boats and how they can trap people inside. Even if you do have, for example, like a life jacket on, you'll just float and be trapped at the top right under that canopy if you're under a lot of water and under that pressure. It's tough because it is still early. The investigation, we've been told, could take a year, upward of that. Roy Blunt has already come out and said it's a little bit too early. Let's let some more of these facts come in before we make a determination.
I thought it was interesting because she has focused on the design of these boats, the canopies, as you mentioned, but there's no effort to say we need to have anybody who is on a boat like that to wear a life jacket. That wasn't included.
No, it wasn't. The personal flotation device is very important. Maybe this should come through Coast Guard regulations and NTSB regulations, since this is a public venue that Ripley Entertainment owns, at least down in Branson. There's other corporations that own that. But why have a federal law when you can have regulations from the department that are charged with overseeing public transport and boat operations, especially in Missouri?
But can government regulate against any risky activity that Americans pursue? I mean, we know, for instance, that there are lots of accidents, deaths involving school buses. Children die. We don't require, seatbelts on school buses or passenger trains, for that matter, for the most part.
Of course not, and maybe we should. What's particularly discouraging in this case, Nick, and we're hearing every politician from every stripe saying we've got to investigate, we've got to take a look at this. It's already been looked at. The National Transportation Safety Board took a look at it, deemed these boats to be unsafe, and the fact that this tragedy occurs in the wake of something like that is pretty discouraging.
But just add quickly that the reason Congress is thinking about stepping in is because they believe, members believe, the Coast Guard has not done its job, that it was given recommendations by the National Transportation Safety Board and did not implement them in a strict enough way to prevent this kind of tragedy from happening. And so that's why Congress may step in. The other thing to keep in mind is, and I think Mark alluded to this, these boats are in places other than Table Rock Lake. They're all over the country in various forms. And so if you did something dramatic, it would affect not just the 7 or 8 boats at this particular operation, but boats across the country. That makes it a little more complicated, but it also jumbles the jurisdiction. If you wanted to ban those boats tomorrow, who would do it? That isn't clear. There are lots of unanswered questions. I do think Congress is getting to a place where it will try and answer.
Wasn't that the same situation, though, when it came to the Schlitterbahn Water Park?
Correct.
Who had the jurisdiction?
Correct. Exactly the exact same problem, that people think their amusement parks are safe, and people think their duck boats are safe because someone is watching out for them. And the fact is that's not true, or not completely true. But that's what needs to be addressed.
And that also goes to the people that you place in office, right? We all say no regulation sounds great until you feel like there should have been some measures in place to protect you and your family. So I think this will be really interesting to see how it unfolds, because to Dave's point, there's a lot of steps and hoops and people involved. So.
I predict within the next year, though, duck boats will be relegated to museums and history museums as a vessel that invaded on D-Day.
Right. I
don't think they're going to be around much longer.
I think that's right.
Newly appointed Jackson County Sheriff Darrell Forte claims he inherited an office in shambles. No-show employees on the payroll, missing weapons, hundreds of sex offenders in the county unaccounted for because of lax oversight. Is the picture as bleak as Forte paints, or is the new sheriff in town trying to attract attention just 2 weeks before voters decide whether they want to keep him in the job, Steve?
I think this could be a case where both things are true, Nick. One maxim of politics in this country is that everything that happens in the weeks leading up to an election, it's all political, and voters and your viewers should be aware of that. But certainly the charges that Darrell Forte have leveled here are worth paying attention to. These are serious, substantial, far-reaching kinds of accusations here that deserve attention, demand attention, that county legislators will have to pay attention.
You've been looking into this, Mark.
I have. I know all the people involved in this. I've talked to every one of them this week. Sheriff Forte says the culture of the SO, the Sheriff's Office, allows wrongdoing, including real and perceived criminal activity. That is a strong allegation, especially against Mike Sharp, who's basically said, hey, I took this gun home on my holster. I don't really wear it that much. With all the hubbub going on, I didn't really realize that I still had it. I've turned it over now to the Fraternal Order of Police representative. There was no nefarious activity. Jeff Jones, who was involved, who worked for the sheriffs, he's down fishing right now on the Arkansas border. He said, look, I was an assistant for Sheriff Sharp. I worked. I can prove that I worked. John Bedoin, who's a very respected public relations person in Lee Summit, said basically the same thing. If you look at social media, I can prove that I worked. I can prove that I earned my pay.
We've had the impression in this race that, Darrell Forte, he was the Kansas City, Missouri police chief. He's got a big name. He's going to be a shoo-in for the sheriff's job when he comes up for re-election just next week on August 7th. But Mike Rogers, who's running against him, actually is doing better even in the fundraising component of this race.
Right, Darrell Forte is a controversial figure, was as Kansas City, Missouri's police chief, and to some degree still in the sheriff's office, particularly based on these allegations. So we'll have to see what happens. But I should point out, Nick, and you may know this, there is an ongoing question as to whether the primary will even be considered to be valid.
Right.
Because of the fact that Sheriff Sharp resigned after the filing deadline, and whether it was properly reopened for new candidates or whether the party should be more involved. That's being adjudicated and may be figured out going forward. There are controversies swirling around this race. Normally people don't pay much attention to the sheriff's office on a primary ballot. This time it is getting some attention.
And by the way, next week we will be going through the entire ballot on both sides of state line, the issues and candidates you need to know about in an entire special Week in Review edition. You know, KU is back in the headlines, and it's not for basketball. 2 weeks after the university was at the center of a national news story over flying an altered American flag, U.S. Attorney General Jeff Sessions singles out the Lawrence School for coddling students, he says, after noting the university is now providing therapy dogs to ease student stress.
In a series of blistering attacks, he tore into universities in general.
They had therapy dogs at the University of Kansas. There are Play-Doh and coloring books at the great University of Michigan. Some schools are doing everything they can to create a generation of sanctimonious, sensitive, supercilious snowflakes.
Now, 2 weeks ago, KU officials immediately brought down an altered flag after political leaders complained. Are they now doing away at KU with the therapy dogs?
I don't know.
They are not. And it should be pointed out that the University of Kansas doesn't own these dogs, doesn't pay for these dogs. Private organizations provide these dogs as part of therapy for students. And as someone who teaches students at that level, let me just point out to the Attorney General that a lot of students are working 2 or 3 part-time jobs, carrying a full-time load. And let me just remind him that there's an enormous amount of stress on these young people, and his snarky attitude toward them and towards universities certainly aren't appreciated in this quarter here.
Slow clap, Steve Cranston. Because here's the deal. Children nowadays, statistics have proven these children are harming themselves. We are in a day and age where we're really going to have to confront self-care and what that looks like. And I just think it's a little bit ridiculous.
I think it's a generational gap, though. I mean, Jeff Sessions comes from an era where I was on the edge of it's like pull yourself up by the bootstraps, buck up, be a man, to some degree.
But times have changed.
Times have changed. That's the point I'm making.
Needs to be
he's
aware
out of touch.
Have changed.
He is out of touch with what's going on.
He's out of touch. Yeah.
The relationship between law enforcement and the public has often been tenuous, but scrutiny of police officers and police departments has never been greater. So what are we to make of one of the local police department's efforts to reinvent its image? Have you seen this video now going viral from the Overland Park Police Department?
6 foot, 7 foot, 8 foot punch. Daylight come and be one go home. 6 foot, 7 foot, 8 foot punch.
Alrighty, people all around the world are now commenting and laughing on the singing, dancing and cheeky antics of OP's officers. But rather than basking in the PR glory, the department is now at the center of controversy. 3 officers forced to resign amid a ticketing scandal. More than 200 traffic tickets have now been dismissed after an internal probe reveals officers issued seatbelt violations to hundreds of drivers when they should have been booked for running red lights and speeding. And adding to the intrigue is that the officers turned off the audio on their dash cameras when speaking with drivers. Are we any wiser as to what the motivations of those officers were this week, Mark?
I don't know about their motivations. I think the chief did a good thing in taking a swift and decisive action to dismiss them. And this is going to play out. They may face some criminal charges. We don't know yet. But to get a seatbelt ticket for not wearing a seatbelt when you're actually probably wearing a seatbelt, that's just not right.
You know, this was supposed to be the week, though, that they were basking in glory of it was an amazing public relations exercise. 3 million hits online for that video. And is all of that being sullied because of this scandal?
No, the video still makes us laugh. It still makes us smile. I think it's indicative of the fact that you have large police departments. Police officers are people, just like we are, right? You can't dismiss educators as a whole because you have a bad teacher here or there. But I think that what's interesting, the seatbelt tickets were given out, but they were cheaper. So it looks like it may have been a situation where some of these officers were like, hey, let's try to save these people some money. But it doesn't look good at the end of the day. But I still think the video's great.
Steve.
Yeah, I think what's troubling about this incident, Nick, and I've done some reporting on it for the newspaper, is that the leadership of Overland Park doesn't know what the officers' motivations were. And I think before they put this thing to bed, that probably is a question they need to get answered here.
Yeah. I would only add that Kraske and I are going to cut "Stop in the Name of Love" for a video in the hope of landing 3 million hits or so in the next couple of weeks.
Well, I have a special,
so
actually.
We'll see if that
I'm
works.
doing a Tom Jones What's Up Pussycat. You'll see that on next week's program. Yeah. Now, last week, we discussed the more than 6,000 complaint calls that have now been logged in Kansas City over mounting trash. We also examined long lines to get a driver's license in Johnson County, when, in fact, the wait was so long, some drivers were being turned away. Well, there are promises made on both sides of state line to change and fix it. Did that happen? Is the trash now being picked up in Kansas City? Have the lines disappeared this week in Johnson County?
The driver's license bureau lines have shortened, at least based on some initial reports. They've extended hours, opened on Monday. There are plans in the works for a third office, which probably should have been opened a decade ago. There was a meeting this week on the trash problem in the Northland, Nick, and there were some promises of efforts to improve it, but it's not clear it's working yet. The most important news out of that meeting to me was the city manager discussing the possibility of using city forces rather than privatized trash collection. If that happens, that'll be a fundamental change in the way lots of people in Kansas City get their trash.
Which, Dave, you probably know that this is the problem nationwide, because the people who have commercial driver's license are few and far between now. It's not easy to get a CDL, and you have to pass a rigorous drug test. They can't find the drivers to pick up trash. Deffenbaugh is competing for them. WCA is competing for them. They bought at Town and Country. Others are like stealing drivers away from other companies to get the trash picked up.
The way to fix that, of course, is to pay them more money, which the trash companies don't want to do because they'll have to raise rates, and that will make customers irate as well.
But do you want it picked up or do you want to pay more?
Correct. And that's really the fundamental political issue facing this community and all communities. Do you want to pay what it costs or not?
But we could talk about a lot of different problems in the nation, whether it be people worried about Russia, they can be talking about President Trump, immigration, you name it. Isn't it these rubber hits the road local issues that really irk people, though, Steve?
Trash? Yes, Nick.
Yes.
That lights people up very, very quickly, and it needs to get fixed and fixed soon.
Well, I'm a Northlander. My trash wasn't picked up. You hate to be part of the news when you report on the news, but it has improved.
Okay, that's good to know. Just an update finally on another story we recently featured, a proposed gift ban in Kansas City that would block the mayor and the city council from taking Chiefs and Royals tickets, free meals and gifts. Do you think your local elected official should get things like that? Well, it was debated this week, and the result? No, we're fine as we are. Is that the public doesn't care about the issue, or is it that we didn't think it was a valuable way of cleaning up government in the first place?
I think the city council members who voted no think that there isn't a great problem, but distrust in government is huge. And I think what we're going to argue this week is if you don't like what was proposed this week, fine, come up with something else. Because you don't run for office so you can go see the Royals at a reduced cost. You do it because you want to pick up the trash in the Northland. And to the extent you're failing at one but getting the tickets on the other hand, you need to look at
Here's the deal. I've been to the Crown Club a couple of times, fortunate enough to go down there with some friends. It's great. Oh, man, lobster, shrimp, you name it. And I've seen some city council people down there, and I'm thinking, well, how did you... I kind of know what you make. How did you get down here? And I'm thinking, well, you know, all these things are running through my mind. Did somebody...
So it's an appearance issue.
It's an appearance issue.
Yes,
well, one of the things muddling this issue at City Hall is the fact that one leading candidate for mayor, Scott Taylor, is proposing this, and other candidates for mayor who are serving on the council aren't quite ready to give him a big win here, so close to an upcoming mayoral election.
I mean, I do agree. I think it's about about appearance, but there's also the idea that when people drop donuts off at good old KCPT, do you eat them?
I absolutely do not. In fact, our station went to the Royals this week, and who didn't go? Nick Haynes. And they had the free all-you-can-eat buffet. I didn't go. That's our Week in Review, folks. Our thanks to our news reviewers, keeping you up to date. Weekdays at 11 on KCUR-FM, Steve Kraske. And from the studios of 41 Action News, Dia Wall. From the Fox 4 Morning News team, Mark Alford. And from the pages of your Kansas City Star, Dave Helling. Next week, making sense of your ballot, or your handy-dandy guide to the upcoming election. I'm Nick Haynes. From all of us at KCPT, thanks for spending part of your weekend with us.